Imagine one careless line. "Let's hurry, I have more important things to do," shifting an entire courtroom's air, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. The Providence Municipal Court is only half full, but carries the familiar sense of worn varnish, damp coats from the morning drizzle, and the faint dust of old files. Wooden benches groan when people shift. A low murmur rolls through the room. Traffic tickets, expired meters, nothing exciting. Until the door handle clicks. Heads turn. He walks in like he owns the hour. Late 20s. Designer jacket, sneakers that cost more than most people's rent. Phone still lit in his hand. He doesn't silence it, doesn't pocket it. He treats it like a separate limb. No hesitation, no apology, just an assured stride to the defendant's spot. The whispers begin instantly. "That's him. Isn't that the tech guy's kid? CEO of Helix Systems. Yeah, must be." He doesn't sit. He stands, weight on one leg, scrolling. The clerk calls his name once, twice. He lifts his eyes halfway, as if granting permission. Judge Caprio observes quietly. His posture is gentle, but his gaze holds the room. He speaks with that calm firmness Providence knows well. "Sir, please state your name for the record." The young man sighs, an audible, irritated sigh, and replies to his screen more than the judge. "Can you talk to my assistant? She handles everything." A breathless ripple travels through the courtroom. Someone chuckles under their breath. Someone else mutters, "Oh boy." Caprio doesn't raise his voice. He simply narrows his eyes the way only a man who has seen thousands of excuses can do. "In this courtroom," he says, "I speak with people, not with their assistants." The young man finally pockets his phone, rolling his shoulders back like a boxer ready to show off. "It's just a parking ticket," he says. "I parked for 2 minutes. Fire lane or whatever. My father said it's all just a formality." Again that hush. He clearly expects the judge to nod and move on. But Caprio opens a beige folder, thicker than a parking issue should ever require. Inside, photographs, timestamps, 3 ignored notices, and a letter from the police department warning of a possible bench warrant if he continued to dodge court. The judge studies the papers longer than the room anticipates. The young man's confidence flickers for the first time. Caprio lifts his eyes. "Son," he says softly, "when a matter is ignored 3 times, it ceases to be a small thing." People lean forward without meaning to. The case feels heavier than a traffic violation. Something unspoken hangs between the judge's pause and the young man's sudden stillness. Caprio closes the folder slowly. "And I suspect," he adds, "there is more here than meets the eye." The room freezes. The hook is set. Something much bigger just walked into the courtroom with him. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Judge Caprio doesn't rush. He lets the silence settle before leaning forward slightly. "It seems," he says, "you've learned to move through life above the lines everyone else has to follow. Am I wrong?" The question lands like a slow punch. The young man stiffens, his jaw tightening. "I'm just extremely busy," he mutters. "That's all." Caprio doesn't blink. Busy enough to ignore 3 notices. Busy enough to send an assistant to handle your name for you. The room is quiet, but not empty. There's a collective listening, a pressure he can feel on his shoulders. He tries to shrug it off with practiced confidence, but a faint tremor slips into his voice. "I didn't think it mattered. Things like this get taken care of." It's the first human crack in him. Thin, but unmistakable. Taken care of by whom? The judge asks. He hesitates. "My father's office. His people usually deal with these things." "And your father?" Caprio asks gently. "Does he know you're standing here today?" A long pause. "No," he finally says. He wouldn't want to waste his time on this. The judge nods once, slowly. "And your mother?" he asks. The answer doesn't come quickly. When it does, it arrives in a quiet, uneven tone. "She's not in the picture anymore." There's no explanation, no detail, just a door slammed shut in a single sentence. The older listeners in the room instinctively soften, but the young man keeps his face stiff, as if revealing anything further would cause it to break. Caprio turns a page in the file. 14 violations, he reads aloud. All paid by corporate accounts. None by you. The young man looks at the floor. "This tells me something," the judge continues. "Not about your wealth. Not about your car. About you." The young man forces a weak smile, but it's painfully out of place. I mean, that's how it's always worked. Caprio lowers the file. Has it worked for you? Truly? He doesn't answer. The silence stretches until it becomes uncomfortable. Someone in the back clears their throat. Someone else murmurs, "Poor kid." Not with pity for privilege, but for emptiness. Caprio softens his voice. It seems to me you've never had to face consequences directly. That creates a world where everything bends, until one day something doesn't. The young man's shoulders sink. He looks suddenly younger, as if stripped of the armor that wasn't really armor at all, just habit, inherited arrogance, and an unspoken loneliness. He touches the papers in front of him without purpose, almost as if hoping they'll tell him what to say. "I'm not used to this," he whispers. The judge nods, almost warmly. No one is the first time. The line hangs in the air, an invitation, not a judgment, guiding the story toward the deeper truths waiting beneath the surface. Judge Caprio turns another page, then stops, not abruptly, but with the intent of someone who sees a thread out of place. "Sir," he says, "this signature on the towing notice, it doesn't resemble the signature on your driver's license." The young man swallows. "I was in a hurry. My assistant, she sometimes signs things for me." Caprio lifts the two documents side by side. "Sometimes is one thing. These aren't even close." The room leans forward an inch without meaning to. He shifts nervously, pulling at the cuff of his sleeve. "I didn't forge anything," he mutters. "I just don't handle these things personally." "That much is clear," the judge replies. He places the papers down, palms open, and now his tone changes. Not harsher, simply more exact. "I also noticed the incident report was filed in two formats. One typed, one handwritten. That's unusual." A low ripple moves through the audience. Half whisper, half disbelief. The young man's cheeks flush. "I don't know anything about that," he says too quickly. The judge doesn't argue. He simply looks toward the rear of the courtroom. At that moment, the door opens. A young patrol officer steps in, still in uniform, the kind of presence that carries sincerity rather than authority. "Your Honor," he says, "I issued the original citation. I'd like to clarify something." The defendant stiffens, recognizing him instantly. The officer continues, voice steady but controlled. "The vehicle was stopped in front of a hydrant. When I asked him to move it, he told me." The officer hesitates, choosing his words carefully, "that his father pays our salaries." The courtroom freezes. Someone exhales sharply. Someone else whispers, "Unbelievable." The young man shuts his eyes for a second, as if bracing himself against the memory. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded," he says quietly. Caprio's expression doesn't shift, but something cool settles across his face. The officer isn't finished. "I wasn't on routine patrol that day," he explains. "I was responding to a fire 2 blocks over. A kitchen blaze in an apartment building. We were short on time." A heavier silence spreads, thicker, more serious. "I lost 5 minutes trying to get around his car." 5 minutes is not nothing in a fire. The young man looks stunned, almost dazed, as if the weight of that statement hits him with delayed force. I didn't know," he says, voice breaking into something close to shame. "No one told me." Caprio leans forward. "That's the problem," he replies softly. "You never asked." The young man grips the edges of the podium, knuckles whitening. He looks like someone suddenly realizing there are far more layers to this moment than he prepared for. The judge studies him a moment longer, then glances back at the documents. "Your signature missing. Your assistant involved. A firefighter delayed. Something here," he says, "isn't lining up." A faint murmur spreads through the room again. Not loud, not dramatic, just a shared sense that a much larger story is beginning to seep through the seams. The young man, once defiant, now appears fragile, caught not by accusation, but by the discovery that his actions created ripples he never imagined. Caprio lets the silence breathe before saying, with quiet precision, "This isn't just a parking case anymore." The line lands like a stone dropped in still water. The young man doesn't argue. He simply lowers his head, as though bracing himself for truths he won't be able to sidestep next. And the courtroom, sensing a shift too profound to ignore, waits for the next revelation. Judge Caprio closes the folder with a measured tap, then looks across the courtroom. "Is there anyone here who can confirm or dispute what happened that day?" The question seems routine, until a hand rises from the middle row. A woman in a simple cardigan, hair pulled back, the kind of face people in the neighborhood recognize from early mornings and warm cups of coffee. I own the cafe across from that hydrant, she says. I brought something with me just in case. The room stills. Even the judge raises his brows. Surprise, not skepticism. She walks to the clerk's desk and sets down a small flash drive. These are recordings from my security camera. I didn't know if anyone would ever bother to look, but here they are. A few heartbeats later, the screen flickers on. The video begins with a young man's sleek car rolling into the frame, too fast for a narrow city street. He slows only when he reaches the curb painted bright red. The hydrant is unmistakable. He glances at it. He smirks. He parks anyway. The judge watches without expression, but the room reacts in waves, sharp breaths, soft groans, a few murmured, "You've got to be kidding me." Then comes the audio, faint but clear. His voice on the recording. Firefighters aren't busy today. The words settle like ash. Even the defendant freezes, staring at the screen as though witnessing a stranger. Caprio leans back, fingers steepled, letting the silence stretch. It's not punitive, it's surgical. But the video isn't done. In the corner of the frame, a white ambulance squeezes into view, inching through traffic. The driver tries to angle the vehicle, but the parked car blocks the path. The rig wobbles to the side, inches from scraping a pole, struggling to clear the tight space. A few older spectators cover their mouths. Someone mutters, "Lord help us." The defendant shifts his weight, throat tight, as if the room has become smaller by the second. Judge Caprio finally speaks, not loud, not angry, simply with the gravity of a man who has seen too much avoidable suffering. "Son, do you understand that those seconds, those few, careless seconds, could have cost someone their life?" The young man tries to form a sentence, but the words don't come. His breath catches, his face pales. The arrogant shell he wore so proudly now looks flimsy, brittle. I wasn't thinking. The judge lifts a hand gently. That is exactly the problem. A tremor runs through the room, not fear, but recognition. Everyone over 50 knows what an ambulance delay can mean. Everyone has a story of a neighbor, spouse, friend who depended on a minute, sometimes even less. The young man presses his palms against the podium as though trying to steady himself against the truth finally catching up with him. Caprio studies him for a long moment, then closes the laptop with deliberate calm. "We'll take a 5-minute recess," he says. "Not for me, for you. Use it to think, really think, about the weight of what we just saw." The gavel taps once. Chairs scrape. People rise slowly, still stunned. And the young man remains frozen at the podium, staring at the blank screen, finally realizing he cannot outrun the consequences anymore. He has crossed the threshold. The retreat is over. Only the truth waits on the other side. When the recess ends, the courtroom feels heavier, as though the air itself has absorbed the weight of the video. Judge Caprio returns with a thin stack of documents, familiar in shape, but clearly not part of the initial file. He settles into his seat, adjusts his glasses, and says quietly, "I've asked my clerk to retrieve additional records related to your previous citations. We need clarity before we move forward." The young man stiffens, hands clasped together, eyes lowered. He looks younger than he did 15 minutes ago. The judge begins laying out the pages one by one, each sheet a piece of a puzzle the defendant never expected anyone to assemble. "These," Caprio says, "are the notices mailed to your residence over the last year. 14 envelopes, 14 warnings, 14 ignored obligations." But what hits harder is the next document, a printed chain of emails from his father's corporate accountant. Caprio reads aloud, not theatrically, but with a blunt transparency that leaves nowhere to hide. "Mr. Wilson, your son has accumulated another fine. Do I proceed with payment?" And the reply, "Handle it, as always." The gallery erupts in quiet outrage, soft gasps, a few resigned sighs from older men who have watched this pattern in real life far too many times. The defendant swallows hard, head bowed. He isn't defiant anymore. He looks like someone staring at a truth he'd been shielded from his whole life. "This isn't about a hydrant," the judge continues. "It's about a system you grew up in, a system that erased consequences before you ever felt them." Before the young man can respond, the bailiff opens the side door. A paramedic in uniform enters, Tired posture, steady eyes. She approaches the microphone. I was in that ambulance, she says. We were responding to a call for a 79-year-old man. Chest pain, shortness of breath. The room leans in. Our delay wasn't catastrophic, she continues, but it could have been. We're trained to count in seconds. Hesitation isn't a luxury we have. She pauses, not to accuse, but to let the reality breathe. You didn't know who we were trying to reach. But that's the point. You never know. Her words land with surgical precision. Even the defendant's breath shakens. He whispers, almost involuntarily. I didn't realize. I honestly didn't think my choices stretched that far. The paramedic nods, compassion overtaking frustration. That's why I'm here. Not to hurt you. To make you understand. She steps back, and the room falls into a fragile, reflective silence. Judge Caprio waits until every eye returns to him. Son, he says with measured weight. Today wasn't about humiliation. It was about seeing the full picture. Another document slides across the bench, his name written in bold across the top. This shows you have been living independently for months, the judge says. That tells me you're already trying to break free from the patterns that shaped you. The young man's voice breaks slightly as he answers. I left home because I didn't want to become him, but I didn't know who I was without him telling me what to do. The judge nods gently. That's not unusual. It's human. The defendant draws a slow, shaky breath, like someone who has finally stopped running. I'm tired of being the version of me everyone else built, he says. I want to earn something for myself, even if it's just respect. An older man in the back row murmurs, good for him, and several heads nod. Caprio closes the final folder. Well, he says, folding his hands, we now have truth, context, and accountability. All the pieces are on the table. He leans forward slightly, a quiet gravity in his voice. It's time for judgment. The room stills once more, this time not with outrage, but with anticipation. Something is about to shift. Not just legally, deeply, personally. And for the first time since he walked into the courtroom, the young man stands fully present, ready to hear it. Judge Caprio does not begin with numbers or statutes. Instead, he looks at the young man for a long moment, as if searching for the right doorway into his conscience. When I was a boy, he says softly, my father worked in a small restaurant on Atwell's. One night, a well-dressed customer walked in, snapped his fingers, and said he didn't wait in lines. A faint smile crosses the judge's face, not amused, but remembering. My father told him, in this city, you're a person. That's enough. The courtroom quiets. Even the fluorescent hum seems to dim. You've lived most of your life hearing the opposite, Caprio continues. But today I hope you heard something different. The defendant nods, slowly, as though each movement carries weight he's never felt before. Caprio straightens a stack of papers, though he no longer needs them. Let's talk about consequences, he says. Real ones. A few in the gallery brace themselves, expecting a harsh financial blow. But the judge surprises them. I will not impose the maximum penalties. Fines alone won't teach what you came here to learn. A ripple of surprise moves through the room. Instead, Caprio announces, 14 citations, $500 each. You may pay in installments, so this becomes responsibility, not ruin. The young man blinks, almost startled by the fairness of it. But the judge isn't finished. You will complete 40 hours of community service with the Providence Fire Department, the very station your car obstructed. Someone in the audience whispers, good, under their breath. You will report directly to the captain. You'll listen. You'll learn what seconds mean. The defendant swallows, his throat tight. And, Caprio adds, you will offer personal apologies to the paramedics and to the owner of the cafe, whose footage helped us see the truth. Not written, not delegated. Spoken. From you. The words land with the gravity of a verdict far deeper than a dollar amount. The young man steps toward the microphone. His voice is barely above a whisper at first, but steadier with each word. Your Honor, thank you. I've spent my entire life believing problems belong to other people. I didn't realize that avoiding responsibility is its own kind of damage. He inhales shakily. You're the first person who talked to me like I could change. Not like I was stuck being someone else's mistake. A wave of emotion moves through the gallery, quiet, warm, almost protective. Judge Caprio nods in acknowledgement, but doesn't soften his gaze. This is your crossroads, he says. You can walk out of here unchanged, or you can walk out of here better. That's a decision only you can make. The young man nods again, this time firmly. I want better, he says. A long, silent beat. Then the judge delivers the line that settles into every listener's memory. Justice is not punishment. Justice is a reminder that we carry each other. For a moment, no one moves. Even the bailiff lowers his eyes, absorbing the weight of it. The session adjourns. The young man steps into the hallway. No phone in his hand, no swagger in his step. Just a quiet, unfamiliar clarity. The paramedic is waiting near the exit. He hesitates, then approaches her. I'm sorry, he says, voice steady but humble. Truly. She studies his face for a moment, then offers a small nod. Start fresh, she replies. We all need a first time. He exhales, almost relieved, and walks toward the doors of the courthouse, toward sunlight, sirens in the distance, and a world he's finally ready to meet without hiding behind someone else's armor. And for the first time since entering the courtroom, he doesn't look above the crowd. He walks among them.